Grace and peace to you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. It's great to be with you again. You know, when I used to visit folks in hospital, back in the days when clergy were able to visit folks in hospital, you remember those days? I used to hear a familiar refrain as people got towards the end of their stay in hospital. They would say, "Pastor, I really, really, really want to go home. But I want to go home when I'm ready. I don't want to go home and then have to come back. I don't want to go home and then have to return to the hospital. Pastor, I want to go home and I want to stay home." That idea has been running through my head the last week or two as we start to inch towards returning to in-person worship at St. Armand's Quay Lutheran Church. I really yearn for the day when we're all here together, in person and not just in spirit. But when we return to worship together in person, I want us to do it for keeps. I want to do it and keep doing it. I don't want to return to in-person worship too soon and then it to be a step forward and 2 steps back. To start and then have to stop, to then start again. I want us, when we return, to be together. I don't know when that day will be. The Church Council at St. Armand's Quay has been talking about this. The executive has been talking about it, and the worship team has been talking about it. And we don't have a date yet. We do know we don't want to be amongst the first. We really want to see how this gradual reopening in our town, how that goes. What reopening does to the number of infections and deaths. I have no desire for us to be on the cutting edge of reopening. But we don't want to be the last either. So we will approach this cautiously and lovingly and faithfully. But although we don't know when we'll return to in-person worship, we now have a much better idea of what it will look like when we do. We will have 3 worship services on a Sunday at 9 and 10 and 11. And we'll have 3 back to back like that because our capacity will be much smaller as we start to reopen. We'll have people sitting 7 or so feet apart. That way couples can sit together. Couples won't have to observe the minimum 6 feet. Couples can sit together and that will have then no knock-on effect with other people worshiping. That will maximize our capacity without having to do complex math to figure out the combination of single people and couples. So people will sit 7 feet apart and couples will be able to sit together. If we have worship bulletins, they'll be very simple. And they'll be one-use bulletins. After you've used it, they're recycled. They don't go to some other worshiper. Ushers will have to be very well trained so that as people come in, they're seated appropriately, and in the 20 minutes between worship services, people are guided out of the building to safety as quickly as possible, and the next worship service, folks are invited in. We'll have to take reservations. We'll have a system for doing it, never you fear. But we can't run the risk of people showing up and there being no room at the inn. Christians can't say that. We can't say, "I'm sorry, you can't come in." And nobody wants to be in an overflow area with just maybe one other person. That'll feel very odd. So we'll take reservations for each of the worship services. And if we have the wonderful problem that 3 worship services aren't enough, we're ready to do more than 3. Anything so we can return to worshiping together in person. There'll be no fellowship hour. We're simply not there yet. And there'll also be no communion in the first phase of returning to in-person worship. You would not believe the number of hands it takes to prepare Holy Communion. And each of those hands and each of those stages of preparation is just one more risk of spreading COVID-19. So to begin with, no Holy Communion. Now you can tell that that's just the first phase. And you can imagine now then what the next phase would be like. A return to Holy Communion, but just with the host. And then the phase after that, returning to full Holy Communion. You can imagine phases where we have no fellowship at all, and then we do have a fellowship hour, but just with coffee and tea, until we eventually go through the phases where we can have full fellowship hours together. Now that I've described, at least at 10,000 feet, phase 1, you can start to fill in the blanks of what phase 2 and 3 and 4 might look like. Of course, there's going to be much more detail than that, but that's better to communicate in writing where you can read and reread. For this fireside chat, I hope that view from 10,000 feet has been enough. We're not there yet, but we're getting there. And everything that we do here during the week is getting us ready for that time. But what I can assure you also is this. We know that even when we open the doors for that limited in-person worship, there'll be a number of our folks who simply can't return. There are people undergoing treatment whose immune systems are suppressed. There are folks who'll be a little fearful to come back in that first stage. Well, we're going to keep the online worship going. You'll still be able to tune in to our website and to the Facebook page to see live worship happening here. As I speak, there are people in the sanctuary, bit by bit, taking all that equipment, the lights, the cameras, the cables, the electronics, and slowly starting to move everything back to the sound booth. And the cameras that are on tripods right now will be mounted on the walls. And the wires, which I keep tripping over every time I go into that place. I'm not kidding. I trip every time I go in. It's easy. I'm a klutz and there's 10,000 cables lying around. That's a slight exaggeration. The cables, not being a klutz. I really am a klutz. All those wires will be hidden, so that as people come back to worship in person, there isn't a camera crew in front of them, but that the folks worshiping at home, either here in Florida or all over the United States and back in the UK, will be able to tune in and see worship as beautifully filmed and with the sound as good as it has been up to now. And in fact, as we steadily improve sound and picture going forward. That will keep going. Because audiovisual is going to be a big part of our future. I'm sure you can imagine. Justin Kaiser, that nice young man that works in our sound booth. When Justin first came on board at St. Armand's Key Lutheran Church, you'll remember that we asked him to man the sound booth, adjust the sound levels, and maybe press play and record on a cell phone while we were sharing our worship service by Facebook. Do you remember all those months ago? And that was all Justin had to do. And we've gone from that, from simply pressing play on a cell phone, to lights, camera, action. We couldn't have done it without Justin. Michael and I together couldn't have done it without Justin. So you can imagine that the number of hours that Justin has worked here at St. Armand's Key Lutheran Church since the pandemic first hit has simply grown and grown and grown until he is now a core part of our worship team. And I'm sure you can imagine he's going to remain so even when we return to in-person worship. We still need good recordings, well edited, well lit, the sound just so, gradually increasing our quality and capabilities until we are able to broadcast worship in such high quality that it enriches the worship life of those who cannot be here or who join us from miles and miles away. Justin is now part of our staff at St. Armand's Quay Lutheran Church. I'm sure that comes as no surprise to you. We need him for the future, for broadcasting worship, for editing these fireside chats, for producing the music and the music videos that you've all come to enjoy so much, for making sure that St. Armand's Quay Lutheran Church worship and social media presence is second to none. Do you remember the days when people would look up yellow pages to find a church? Yeah, I'm that old too. Or there was a time when people would look at the local newspaper to see who had the best ad. Those days are ending. And now people are looking online, to social media, to the website, to recorded worship services in order to see what church home might become their church home. That is the wave of the future. And I, as your pastor, Michael Bodnick as your minister of music, and Justin Kaiser as your audio-visual and social media person, we're going to be a great team together, moving forward together into this exciting but new future that God has in store for us. So welcome aboard, Justin. And if you can, reach out to Justin to say how much you've appreciated what he's done for us so far, and to say welcome aboard for all that he's going to be doing for us and with us in the future. So in short, you can see that we have not been sleeping here. We have not been resting on our laurels. We have been imagining this new future, and we have been working faithfully towards it. We have been thinking out of the box. We have been embracing this liminal moment that I spoke of the other week. Now you see why I'm so excited. The pieces are falling into place at St. Armand's Quay Lutheran Church. They're falling into place for a return to in-person worship. They're falling into place for us keeping each other safe in love as we do so. They're falling into place for an exciting and bright future that belongs to God. That's why we have no fear. The future belongs to God, and He beckons us to join Him in that future as people of God in Christ Jesus. Still, no matter by which means, and by all means, people that still gather in one way, shape, or form as Lutherans around word and sacrament. I invite you to join us in that future here at St. Armand's Quay Lutheran Church. It is your home. But when you return to this place, you return for keeps. We will work to get this right first time. Until then, keep us in your prayers. Give us your goodwill, your loving encouragement, and your faithful support. May God be with you until we meet again.